years in our community, us folk witches, we sort of got pushed to the side sometime. You just got to dance around the bonfire once under a full moon. What's so important about dirt? It's the entire universe. When you hold it in your hand, you're holding everything that is, everything that was, and everything that will be. Boo Hags like to count. That's why you leave them a broom, and that's why you leave them a colander, so they have something to count, but they're very bad at counting, so they never finish. Abraham looked upon it and said, no, I can talk to God on my own. I do not need these temples. But I'm also so happy to see this coming out, where people are starting to connect to their own stories, their own regions, their own magic.
Hello and welcome to Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Boom Books Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. I am beyond excited to welcome fellow Moonbooks author and amazing magical practitioner, Taran. Welcome.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to that.
I have no doubts.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
It's lovely to have you. Now let's start with the usual question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a Southerner. I live right outside of Charleston on the Sea Islands. I've been in and out of this area since I was 17 years old. And I tell folks I have we just moved here 8 months ago. I had just come back from visiting a foreign country. I was in California for 7 years. It sounds like a joke, but understanding how large America truly is, and for me, who's always lived in this, little southern bubble, getting the opportunity to go someplace different, and to look back on my world. And it was such a privilege, such an opportunity. And I think that having the courage to do it, to just, we're moving to California, was where my book, Conjuring Dirt, came about. Right. The ability to look back at my world.
Excellent.
And so that was very important. I know you asked me a little about myself, and I'm already talking about my book.
You go wherever it goes.
They're intertwined for me with my practice and what I'm about. I consider myself to be a modern folk witch, southern witch, conjurer, southern conjure. There's all sorts of names you can call me. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Priorities.
Yes, ma'am. I answer to most of it. It's like I don't want to get stuck on labels. Those sort of concern me a little bit. I think that we're not careful, it limits us and puts us in boxes.
Absolutely.
When the world is really it's such a wonderful buffet.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. You are Taran. That should be all the explanation that's needed. So when did you start? I mean, your spiritual journey is fascinating. When did it all begin? And how did it all begin?
I think actually I was very typical within our community, because what I've noticed is a lot of magical practitioners come into the awareness as we're going through adolescent puberty, where, somewhere in that 12, 14-year-old time period, you start looking at that witchy black hat just a little different. And everything. And I was so blessed to be able to get involved with a local witchy folk magic group. In my late teens, early 20s, that it was just this wonderful group that set such a solid foundation that I still stand on today. And, with her, Elizabeth was all about, that get out there and experience. We live in this amazing world. And so that came about. And then life always puts twists and turns in. I ended up walking into southern Botanica, Papa Nico, who's a Haitian voodoo priest, walking into his shop asking if he had black candles. was our introduction. And, 33 years later, but during that time, I had the privilege of working in the shop for many years. And that was a really big learning curve because I had access to all the practitioners that were coming in. So I got to chit chat with a lot of folks.
Fabulous.
For me, when I was working with HooDoo and the Psalms, my first book with Moon Books, it really was the shop. I can remember these dynamic conversations about some of the different workings within the Psalms, some of the things I knew, some of the things other people were telling me. And it gave me such a unique opportunity to write down recipes and workings that were being used today, right now, as opposed to this isn't an ancient grimoire asking you to boil frogs. This is, this is what the practitioners are actually doing. And I often describe HooDoo in the Psalms as a love letter to my grandmother, who was a Southern Baptist prayer healer. She was the one who introduced me to the magic of the Psalms. My second book, Conjuring Dirt, ended up being a love letter to myself of this celebration, because for years in our community, us folk witches, we sort of got pushed to the side sometimes.
Yep.
And we were told don't worry about what those doing, type things. And so it was really nice to be in a place where I know our community is starting to really understand all of the different flavors of magic that are out there and starting to give space to it. And so I was very emboldened, I guess. And that's where that inspiration, like I said, sitting in California, panning for my Southern roots, and started writing stories down. And so I'm so grateful that my journey has been where it's been. I often refer to myself as Crossroads witch, because I stand on a lot of different magical strands that make me personal. They're my regional, my ancestral, my culture. And that's what I want to encourage other folks to do. Is it's not supposed to be tight and needy and in a little box and it all makes sense. I think a good magical journey should be wonderfully messy,
Oh, I know.
And parts of it may not make sense.
Absolutely. Chaos. Got to have a bit of chaos.
We should end up places that we don't know where we're at sometimes. Walk on the edge a little is where it's at. But it was just bringing all of that together and Conjuring Dirt and telling stories of some of my firsthand experiences, telling stories on some of the folk around me.
Now, you mentioned community then. House of Witchcraft is something that you've brought together as a community. Can you tell us a bit about what House of Witchcraft is?
House of Witchcraft started before I knew it started. First of all, people are like, wow, because we on social media looks like all of a sudden it appeared, but in reality, it had been here for probably since the late 90s. Okay. And slowly evolving. We are folk magic tradition. As I spoke earlier, my first group was very much this conjure traditional witchcraft coming together, and we took that and put our own twist on it. And the House of Witchcraft has its own flavor of Crossroads witchcraft, brought it online as a community for folks. And we now have 3, 4, 5 covens. I'm so sorry if I missed somebody. I'm like, ooh, I don't know. Y'all don't get mad at me on it. I think it's 3 official and 2 study groups. And we have this group here in Charleston forming. So it's growing. I also have people you can come online and participate in the House of Witchcraft as a solitaire. to inspire. I think my biggest thing with House of Witchcraft is it's about inspiring, encouraging, empowering other witches to stand in their own personal crossroads.
Perfect.
And we have been having so much fun doing it. Every year I take a group of witches to New Orleans so that we can go really get into America's magic. And this year I'm getting to invite everyone out to my farm here outside of Charleston, and I am so excited for that.
Excellent. I wish I was there, really.
We're hoping in subsequent years to maybe have a little larger. I don't ever want to be an event. I want intimate, small type groups to come together. I believe magic witchcraft is best conveyed in person in dynamic conversations where we can get all up in it, get your hands in it and mush it around some. I sometimes and I do with the internet, with social media, with online programs, I think they have their place, but I think the best place you can be is sitting around with a circle of magical folk and having these conversations and listening to others' experiences. And so for me, that's what I want. The next step is to be able to bring that together and to be able to host those events for other organizations that would also like to do that with their folk.
Yeah, it's balance, isn't it? The internet has opened up so much for us, but nothing replaces actually getting out there and doing it hands-on, does it?
You just got to dance around the bonfire once under a full moon to know that nothing replaces it. And it is so great that we have the internet. I mean, you're in England, I'm in South Carolina, and we're, when I was a young witch, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to the coven meeting. I talk with folks about, the Witches League of Public Awareness used to put out a new quarterly newsletter, and we had to send in, I think it was like $2.25 and 2 stamps. And then we would get our quarterly newsletter, and how excited we were to get these.
Different world.
Through the mail. Yes, you remember as well. We're telling our age here.
Trying to find things to learn from in England without pre-internet was a challenge.
Oh, it was and we still figured out ways to do it. We still figured out ways to come together. It was nothing back then. You wouldn't, I'd be like, I'll drive 150 miles to read a book.
If I drove that far, I'd probably fall off the edge of the island, but...
Well, in context, you would drive to the other side of the island for a book. I love some of Doreen Valente's stories of where she was, on the trains and the buses all the time, going to all these different libraries, all these museums and everything. And sometimes I think that the journey is part of the magic. And that we've lost that.
I think
now we just...
There's a speed, isn't there? There's a rush to get to the end of it. I want the certificate, or I want to complete this, I want to complete that. People do forget about actually experiencing the journey.
And I can remember driving and being so excited. We were, we're getting closer to the books. And now we just press Amazon and whatever book we want comes, and we do. It is nice because we have access to books that I know when I was younger, we didn't have access to. Many of our manuscripts, our grimoires, a lot of our folk journals. I'm excited because the American folk journal is being digitized. And this is a big moment, and this is a journal that recorded folk magics, beliefs, cultural, regional influences, from the 1880s up until present. but that 1880s to 1930s sweet spot.
Fascinating stuff.
And yes, it is. And we haven't been able to, unless you own a copy of one of the originals, you haven't had access to it. I've only got my hands on a couple of journals that I've got photocopies of. And so I am very excited with all of the access to knowledge, but at the same time, I can see as a new person where all this access is very overwhelming.
Yeah. So let's talk about something that's much more straightforward. Dirt. Let's have a dirt conversation. What's so important about dirt?
What's so important about dirt? It's the entire universe. When you hold it in your hand, you're holding everything that is, everything that was, and everything that will be. You're holding the entire memories of that ecosystem that you're standing in. Dirt carries memories with it. It carries the memories of the footprints who walked upon it. It carries the memories of the bodies that were buried in it. It carries the memories of the plants that grow in it. It is so necessary for everything. You know, without dirt, life would be boring. Within Southern folk magic and also within our hoodoo, our Black folk traditions, the use of dirt is prominent in not only our magic, but also in our spiritual practices. Within our spiritual practices, we're using them as a way to honor where we've been. We're using them as a way to honor where our ancestors are, a way to connect to them. That's by the use of the graveyard dirt. Within magic, as I spoke earlier, we understand that dirt has this memory to it, and that we can use that memory. We can use the bank of the dirt of a bank for prosperity. We can get a little bit of a handful around a hospital for healing, a little bit around a jail if we think he's a shit. And of course, if we're looking for justice, the courthouse.
So I think people are probably familiar with graveyard dirt, but all of these other ones that you're mentioning, I think there's probably a lot of people that haven't made that connection.
Yeah, I agree 100%, but I didn't realize it until I wrote the book. People are like, who's that? And I'm like, well, we've been doing it over here for hundreds of years. And then I start doing research and find out other folks have been doing it for a very long time as well. And we often think about when we travel that we'll take a seashell, a rock, and some folks take a little handful of dirt as a way to remember that experience. You know, I think a lot of folks are using dirt, honoring dirt, but not, like you said, putting the pieces to it together. You know, here we just been doing it. I mean, like, I can remember one of my first workings was getting, the church, the courthouse, and the jail dirt together. I just sort of assumed everybody else did that too.
No. But it makes sense. It makes sense.
I guess also, you know, we didn't have the stores. We didn't have the options. We had to go in our backyard and connect with what was around us. And sometimes I think a lot of this marketing, the commodification, all of the aesthetics is noise pushing us further away from the natural magic, from the nature of magic.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. But yeah, yes, you're right. It's easy to just buy a packet of stuff, whatever it might be, rather than doing the work to get it.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what it should be about. You should be doing a working. You need to be putting some effort into it. You're asking the universe to tilt from left to right in your favor, and you just want to press a button.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. Yes, it makes it more important. It makes it more powerful, surely, if you're putting all of that effort into it.
There is a satisfaction with, just knowing that, you know, today I'm going to go over here and get this little something that I need. I'm going down to the courthouse. And that's my rooster.
I love that we have a rooster. That's brilliant. That's real magic.
I raised him from a small little chick, and he follows me around, and he's standing outside the door because he saw me come in. I wish I could turn the camera because he's standing there.
He wants to be a part of it.
I'm so sorry. My train fell off its track. I lost it on that rooster. Oh, the gathering of ingredients, the journey to gathering ingredients and having to go walk through the woods, drive around and find that perfect whatever you're looking for, and slowly acquiring and bringing them all together. All the time you're doing that, you are working the magic. Whatever spell you're doing, you're working it as you're gathering these ingredients. That's part of the magic. Just grabbing something out of the bag and sprinkling, lighting a candle and being like, why ain't it working? You ain't got no connection to nothing. It ain't got nothing to work on.
Yeah, connection, I think, is the key there, isn't it? That's really important.
Yes, because your efforts, your planning, even just sitting there contemplating on it, where you're like, ooh, I saw that little bit of honeysuckle vine right down the road, and thinking about how you're going to go down there. Or, like I said a couple weeks ago, I actually have a little dustpan and a little broom. People, and I'm going to tell y'all, people ask me this, how do I give them a dirt? Well, typically in the afternoon after lunch, because it takes me a little while to get myself going, I just go up to the courthouse, right, and stand right up there, right in the front, and just stand there.
I love it.
I do not hide. I do not wait until midnight. I do not go out creeping around dressed in all black at 3 a.m. First, it's dangerous. Don't do that. Some neighborhood making it home. And that is far more suspicious than me standing out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I have been standing there doing my sweeping and have people walk by and be like, ooh, you're doing a little something. And I'm like, just working justice. In the community, people know. I just recently we had to hire a lawyer to update our will because we moved back to South Carolina. And so I had to, talk with him a little bit about some things I have going on and, my published books. So I, tell him, and my lawyer's response was, oh, my family owns one of the gold rice plantations. He is one of the families here. And then he goes, yeah, we got a woman that lives up there, and if you upset her, she'll put the root on you. And I was like, I know, you got to watch some of those folks. I mean, HooDoo in the Psalms, conjuring dirties, like, asking, and I was like, oh, this is just, Southern conjure, reworking. And he's like, oh, you can write about that. They're always doing it here. And that we still have, and that's something a lot of folks don't really understand, is the history here. Like, I live where plantations still are, where descendants, both black and white, still live on these spaces. And so there is this generational understanding, and then there's these generational entanglements within these families that's gone on for, hundreds of years now. It wasn't the emancipation and then all the black people were like, we are leaving. They didn't have anywhere to go, so they stayed, the vast majority of them. Over time, I know of another family that the descendants of the black folk, I was about 15 acres they built houses on the plantation. Because they're descendants of the black folk of the plantation, the family that owns the plantation still lets them stay there for free. Built your house.
Okay.
And this happens quite a bit. Like my lawyer was telling me that the Black folks that are at the plantation, those are descendants of the enslaved Africans that came here. The family that owns the plantation is trying to do right in their own ways. And part of that trying to do right is make sure that these people always have a home. This is their land. They have a right to have a house here. Granted, this isn't happening everywhere. I cannot speak for the South in general, but I can tell you my own personal experiences where I've been in many a situation where this is the truth.
That's brilliant.
And where we're having conversations with people that have been on that same farm for 5, 6, 7 generations now. And they have a very deep sense of family towards each other.
But that's important. And that you mentioned spirit of place in your book. And I love that because I work with spirit of place a lot. And that's all part of it, isn't it? The history, the generations. Spirit of place is important in magic, I think, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's back to the dirt carries the memories. And so those little places that seem bright and sparkly, they're spirit folk or spirit entities there that are helping it to be sparkly. And those places that seem dark and gloomy, yeah, there's spirit folk there helping it be dark and gloomy. You know, very simplistic way of looking at it. You know, but really tuning into, I love, what is it, that Marie Kondo lady, I thought was so cool that she introduces herself to her house. Introduce yourself to the house. And understanding, people are, oh, is my house haunted? Well, if you're honoring the spirit of the house, you're honoring the energies of the house. The house is its own unique place. It will keep a lot of stuff out for you. And that we often just think of this as 4 walls, but again, these are walls of energetic memories. And that you do need to introduce yourself to your house. You do need to introduce yourself to the crossroads. And learning to use your intuition, because there are no rules to a lot of this. I think that's the hardest part when we talk about working spirit of place, is that it boils down to your personal connection and how it makes you feel.
I talk to my house.
I do. Yes, I have a whole. I walk periodically. You know, sitting there patting on the wall. You're doing a good job.
Yeah. But it's important, I think, isn't it? It's connection again, isn't it?
Yes. And I think a lot of times folks think that they need to connect to other things over there, or I got to get this so I can connect, or you know, that outside of where you are, not understanding that where you stand right now is so magical.
Absolutely.
And learning to embrace it and work with it, honor it. My house in California, the last year I was there, I was like, you're going to be really pretty and you're going to get a new family and they're going to let you. And I'd just be walking around, you know, and she came on the market and we were 4 days was all it took. Multiple. It got to the point we were just a little overwhelmed, multiple. And I was like, ooh, I got to really bring that glamour magic.
It worked too well.
Yes, and she ended up with a beautiful family and everything. And so, you know, and again, I'm walking around talking to the house. By then it had a personality. Now I have this new space. I'm still experiencing my first year and a day on, you know, this property. And trying to find those places, trying to figure out, you know, the genie loci and where these little corners are and how I can show honor and respect to it. And moving, when we move, we have to understand, we talk year and a days as if it's just this magical initiation, but year and a day is the experiences that we have with everything we do. You know, new job, year and a day. Marriage, year and a day. Moving, year and a day. A death, a year and a day.
Yeah, that's a good guide.
And to allow ourselves to have that year in a day and not let society try to make us into a microwave button. Back to that instant, I think one of the biggest disservices we see is we've lost our funeral rites, where that year of honoring the dead, where society's like, okay, you get 3 days off for the funeral and we'll feel bad for you for the next 3 weeks, and then you need to take the flowers off the desk and get back to work. That's not how it works. And to allow ourselves to have these times, this again is part of that connection to the dirt. I think the most powerful graveyard dirt is a handful of fresh graveyard dirt from a loved one. And to take that home and use it as a way to stay connected and a way to have comfort as that person is going through, you're going through that first year in a day. Let spirit help you out a little. It's not so much using it magically all the time.
Yeah. I suppose that's where we go straight away, don't we? What can I use it for magic for? But it's got a lot of other connections.
Yes, my most special dirts are my grave dirts from my ancestors, and being able to bring those dirts out during the time of the dead, and sitting up an ancestral altar, and sometimes when you're having a rough go of life, I have a little box. They come out. I talk to them, and I always find comfort in it. And that's what it's about. In the end, you feel a little better about yourself.
Which is always good.
It's not trying to be master of the universe.
Now, I have to ask you about one of the terms. You've got some fantastic terms in your book. A few, perhaps, that we probably wouldn't be familiar with so much in England. But I love the term Boo Hags. It was a new term for me. I hadn't come across that one before. So I'll let you explain, if you would.
The Boo Hags and Hates is typically what we talk about. We put them both together, but they are actually two separate entities. The reason we put them together is because we can use similar things to keep them away. And there's sort of the Boo Hag story is first understanding within African belief that was brought over by the Middle Passage, the slave trade. Here, the Boo Hags originated here on the Sea Islands. So I'm like, yeah, we got Boo Hags. Talk about it all the time. If your hair is tangled, Boo Hag got you. Benin is where we can trace this back to. And the Black folk brought over this belief, this discussion of, and there's a really deep discussion on, did they bring the Boo Hags with them? I'm not sure about that whole part, but what a Boo Hag is understanding that within Benin belief is that we have both a spirit and a soul. When you die, your soul elevates, but your spirit stays here. Your spirit, depending on the character of your person, can become a good spirit that becomes a helpful spirit, or it could become a Boo Hag, a bad spirit that causes problems. And after a while, Boo Hag's been a Boo Hag for so long they don't even remember they're a person. They're just a Boo Hag. All right, is what it's about. And sometimes, and this reminds me of like my own grandmother was talking about how important it is during the first year somebody's died that you don't think they were really good, but you got to spend that year praying them down so they can go up. And what you basically, like the Catholics, give penance to people who died, will help pray you into heaven. A very similar belief that's going on here. Pray them down so they can elevate up. But this Boo Hag is now running around causing problems, all right? It's typically like a dark, muddy type crossroads, a little bit of a marsh type atmosphere on a dark night is where you find them. And they also like to creep up into your house. And what they'll do is they'll ride you through the night. And that's when you wake up and you feel like you're not rested, is because basically they took your spirit out for a giant trip. And then there's also stories where they actually took your physical body and went out and ran around with it and then came back and put it in bed. But they like to cause troublesome sleep. And you know what, Boo Hags that are around you, you got knots in the back of your hair because they like to do that. That's why you see here in the South, a lot of times there'll be a mirror out on the front porch. There'll be a broom out on the front porch. And there can also be a colander that they'll hang.
Okay.
Because Boo Hags like to count.
Okay.
That's why you leave them a broom, and that's why you leave them a colander. So they have something to count, but they're very bad at counting, so they never finish by the time the first rays of the sun come up. Boo Hags are also very vain and like to look at themselves in mirrors, or Boo Hags do not like mirrors at all and do not want to get near one.
It works either way.
I think we can have place for both of these within this folklore. And hates are another spirit that has sort of gone bad. And that's where we have Haint Blue, where we paint our porches, our window seals, our shutters, this watery turquoisey blue. If you go to downtown Charleston, the historical homes down there, look up at the top of their porches. They're all painted at various shades of paint blue. You could actually go into the local hardware store, the paint section, and they have a little row of paint blues.
Okay, excellent.
See, because again, it's part of the norm here. Why? Of course, you're going to paint the top, the ceiling of the porch paint blue. There is no, you're not gonna. It's just a matter of which shade do you like. Do you want a little lighter? You want a little darker? A little turquoisier? Type situation. And, and we're talking about, because it was too funny. I'm painting over at our place, and somebody asked me what color were you painting it. That was like, really? You're going to ask me? Knowing where I live, you don't think I ain't going to have spirit bottles up in the front yard, and I ain't got Haint Blue everywhere, because I'm keeping them wet. I mean, where I live is really well known for Boo Hags.
I'd never heard the term before. Haints I'd heard of. Boo Hags I hadn't heard of. It's a fantastic term.
It's a wonderful story that became alive. It was, I think, an identifier that was put on some of the genie loci here on the Sea Islands. All right, Black folks didn't have, another way to describe the genie loci that they were experiencing, and based on their own cultural perceptions, it became a Boo Hag. We see things very similar as well when we get into the Afro-Caribbean areas. They don't call it a Boo Hag; they have other names for it. But these spirits that ride people at night, these spirits that get into people's dreams, these spirits that are basically like an energy vampire and suck the energy out of you so that they can use it. It's very common, and that was something, again, that fascinated me. My Boo Hag is is somebody else's, whatever you call it. Every region has some sort of, I touched on it, with the Tommy knockers, in which we know, from the Cornish mines and everything that were, and that came over here, and our genie loci got described as Tommyknockers too for the miners. And to this day, they are still honored on both sides of the pond. And so again, there's things out there.
Some best left alone. Now, you have mentioned Crossroads a few times, and you do write about it in your book. Why the Crossroads? What is so important about Crossroads and working magic there? Big question, I know.
Magical works best in liminal spaces. The most physical liminal space you can stand in is a crossroads, because you're neither here nor there. You're neither part of any of the roads coming in or going out. You're in its own unique spot.
That was a straightforward answer and summed up beautifully. That's it. Crossroads, people. That's it in a nutshell.
We're not really that complicated. Of the most liminal times you can work are done at dawn and dusk, with the golden hour, the blue hour, they have such beautiful names for these two times, and a lot of things happens right at that twilight moment where we're transitioning from day to evening. And that is, again, a very liminal space to work in. And it is a crossroads. It's neither day nor night in that moment. You're in that crossroads moment between.
Perfect description. Now, Conjuring Dirt is fantastic, and it's so full of history and mythology and folklore and practical stuff as well. Absolutely brilliant book. But can we just touch on the Psalms as well? Because that was an amazing revelation for me, hearing you talk about the Psalms in magic and reading your book. What prompted you to go with that, with the Psalms? And how did you discover, well, I'm assuming through the shop, you discovered that that's how they were magic?
No, my grandma.
Right.
My grandmother was a Southern Baptist faith healer. I grew up with the use of the Psalms as a healing, way of healing. I was never referred to as magic. Right. That would not be a word that was used for those folks. Like I said, she was a faith healer. And she, magic. And my family is part of the Primitive Baptist. We're this little sect of mystical, magical Baptists, but you don't say mystical and magical. You just do faith healing. So I grew up with it. And when I got into the shop, seeing other people do it was my fascination. And then starting to go down that rabbit hole of what is the Psalms? Other than one of 5 books of the Old Testament, and my grandma used to do it when the phone rang, and they'd be like, Miss So-and-so's in the hospital. And she'd be like, okay. And she had a little table that had a white candle on it. She had a white Bible that she would open it up to a healing psalm, and she would sit there and read that psalm out loud. All right? And so getting into it further and understanding, first of all, the Psalms predate Christianity by 1,500 years easily. And that they are this Psalmatic King David magic, and which slowly over time, we forgot its history. We often, think of, King David was the one that is the father of modern occultism as we know it. His son, King Solomon, Solomatic magic, the keys of Solomon, the 76 names of demons, the ring of a demon that he can destroy any demon with, and things like that all come from this time period. The same time period that the Psalms were being sung. The Psalms are incantations. They're either a lamentation or an incantation. And unfortunately, we only have 150 of them. We do know through references that at points there were thousands of them. They were sung individually, much like, we all write our own incantation and we all speak our incantation. That is how the Psalms were being done. The surviving Psalms that we have, we do attribute 3 of them to King Solomon, and there's one to Moses, and then there's, some other folks that we have. And these are the beginnings of the Abrahamic faith, and people not quite understanding what the beginning of the Abrahamic faith was about. That was Abraham and Sarah, these 2 wonderful people that were looking upon the corrupt temples of Babylon, looking upon the corrupt temples of the Phoenicians, the Etruscans, all these other folks, because they were corrupt. At this point in history, the temples were being ran by priests who were charging you to come into the temple. All right? If you wanted to go to the temple of Mercury, you want to go to the temple of Artemis, well, sweetheart, you had to pay to play. All right? And Abraham looked upon it and said, no, I can talk to God on my own. I do not need these temples. All right? And turned his back on the corruption of the priest. Much like we talk about today, where you start thinking about some of that. This isn't too ancient. You can relate to this story, and I'm talking about, 2,000 years ago. But that's what Abraham was turning his back on. Was that I don't need a mediator. I don't need a priest. I don't need a temple. I can stand on this mountain and have an experience with God. And at this moment, this was the formation of the Abrahamic traditions, all right? And during this time, that's, where we have the Brothers of the Light. We have different sects going on in this early time period, and all of them were mystical and magical. All right? And the Psalms were being sung during this time. The Psalms were, some of them were being written, some were being forgotten, And then slowly, as the Christian faith solidified down, and we ended up in the Council of Nicaea, where we said, these are the official words. And we put God in a box and said, the rest of this, no, ignore it. Just ignore it. We're not going to even act like it happened. All right? And starting to really rediscover and understand that, and when you are singing the Psalms, you are connecting to all of that history. You are connecting to these original people who understood that I can have a relationship with divinity. I don't need you. Me and God are just good. We're talking fun.
There is a bit of a I don't know for where you are, but where we are in Britain, generally when I speak to a lot of witches, a lot of pagans, the idea of using a prayer or a psalm is horrific because it is so, it's just associated with Christianity, and that's not what I do as a pagan. So to actually read about all the history of the Psalms and actually learning a little bit about HooDoo as well, it's an eye-opener. It is an absolute eye-opener. The book's fantastic.
It's a shame that early contemporary witchcraft, especially with the neo-pagan Wiccan influences, was very anti-Christian. And Gardner really was very much that high magic OTO, these ancient religion reconstructionist ideas. I'm of the opinion, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. All right? I will go down the road on, let's go with how corrupt is the church. I will target how corrupt this little church down the road with this wackadoo pastor is. That's not the essence, the truth of the Christian mysticism, the Christian magic that was experienced. I think a lot of folks are, especially like where I'm from, we always joke about, I'm going through Baptist trauma. of, fire and brimstone, everyone's going to hell. Having to deconstruct that and at the same time still hold on to some of the principles, some of the parts of the faith, I think is really difficult for people. I've talked with some of the Wiccan, neo-pagan folks with no, and then I sit there and talk to them for a couple minutes, and they're like, I didn't know that.
It is, revelation.
And having to be like, okay, you only have access to this little bubble, and the information within the bubble never changes, this underlying Wiccan belief system that you're working in that is based on the fact you're prehistory, pre-Christianity, which we know the Robert Graves story is not true. Or at least I would hope we could all embrace that it ain't true. And that magic's far more mushier than that. It's not these over here and then over here systems. All right. When we look into our prehistory, we see the mixing of Christianity, Catholicism throughout many, many folk beliefs. All right. And within many folk systems, folk magic systems, it is embraced and used. It was another ingredient that was put in our bioregions because each region has its own flavor. So when you added, Louisiana likes its Catholicism, South Carolina, we like our Protestants. Why? Because that was what was infused into our local folk belief systems. And so we embraced it and used it. Whereas within the Wicca neo-pagan, there is no connection to your cultural, your region, or your ancestors. So you would lose all of that and go honor some Greek god or some Roman god or something. And so it's no wonder you have no concept of the magic that's part of the Abrahamic faith. I mean, the Jewish mysticism in the Kabbalah, the tree of life, I find they'll be like, oh, no Christianity. And I'm like, but you're all about the Kabbalah? Please explain this to me.
There's quite a bit of confusion.
You embrace the tree of life, but the Psalms can't do that. And I'm like, sure, you do you, Boo. I'm not going to audit. I think more people are getting aware of, like I was saying earlier, more
it's knowledge,
us.
I had no idea until I read your book, and it was a complete eye-opener. And a lot of things fell into place once you have that information.
Right. I said, for us, through a lot of the 80s and the 90s, if I turned in HooDoo and the Psalms to a publisher, they wouldn't have touched that with a 10-foot pole. It was all about the Morgan. It was all about the Wiccan belief systems, the gods and goddesses of Wicca. And they'd be like, oh, no, that's not what we want.
I think there are fashion trends, though, aren't there? In witchcraft, in paganism, there are fashion trends, just like anything else, we get hit with it.
Yeah, so now the folk magic fashion trend, I find it fascinating as an old timer again, where I'm like, wow, all of a sudden I have new friends. Isn't this fascinating? But I'm also so happy to see this coming out where people are starting to connect to their own stories, their own regions, their own magics, and understanding that, it is, I often talk about, it's a funky gumbo. It's got bits and pieces of all sorts of stuff in it. And we need to celebrate it and stop trying to sort it and separate it. All right? It works like that. No, it don't make sense.
I don't have to.
But right. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. That's right. It don't have to. What it does is it works. And if it works, it's good. Then you keep doing it. If it don't work, you don't do it no more.
Now, very quickly, for those that aren't aware, and it still surprises me how people don't understand or know what HooDoo is. Can you give us a quick kind of summing up of what HooDoo is?
I would say I could give the long answer or the short. HooDoo is African American folk magic. It is the middle passage, the slave passage that brought Africans here. Africans, like I was talking for my area, we were influenced by Benin and Congo. Both of those areas already had Catholicism in those areas. All right? These weren't primitive peoples. These were organized communities, villages, tradespeople, very talented farmers. That's why they were taken. The folks from Benin grew rice. They needed rice grown here, so they went and got some rice people. But then when they got here, it was other influences from other Africans coming in. So there was a sharing of knowledge where we, come out of Benin and we're going up the Ivory Coast into the other areas there. And then it got influenced by Native Americans. And then the last influence, of course, would have been Europeans. And that is so determined by where you are. Like where I live is where the Gullah Geechee are. And they lived out on the Sea Islands. There was no roads to get out there. You used to have to take a boat, actually, to get where we live. And so they were isolated, and they were able to keep more of an African and more of a Native American influence into their area. Whereas if I get a little further up the coast, there's going to be more influences from the outside coming into it. And within the HooDoo tradition, some are very closed. They are part of a family practice. This has been given down. A lot of people get a little surprised when I say this. They typically have it recorded in their Bible. All right. And they carry a very, I don't want to say secret, but a very quiet type thing. And then in other areas where there was more European influence coming into it, is where we pick up that Southern conjured side. I think Corey Hutchinson, who is an academic folklorist, he wrote New World Witchery, described it really best with understanding that these are two different groups of people that have transferred knowledge with each other, at points are working synchronistic with each other, but we still have different influences. Our gumbo's got a little different to it. When I wrote HooDoo in the Psalms, I didn't quite get the distinctions between Southern Conjure and HooDoo, and I used them interchangeably. If I had to go back, I would still call it HooDoo in the Psalms because I still believe that that's what it is. It is giving honor to the Black folk, and which really kept it alive. All right, it had gone tapped so far down within our European systems because it had already in the British Isles. You don't do that with the Bible, and you weren't even allowed to read the Bible at some point. So there was already a very strong disassociation from magic in the Psalms. So it was carried over within our Germanic influences. That's where we have our powwow magic, because within the German magical systems, they were actually still using the Psalms through their grimoire. The grimoire traditions of the 14th and 15th centuries, that's where Solomon's magic, the seals of Solomon, and write this psalm down, in which, the neo-pagans were like, why am I writing down a psalm? And just not putting all of these pieces together. I try to be very mindful when I am speaking that I am not representing something that's not mine. I believe many of the HooDoo magical traditions are definitely Black folk only. And the reason I say that is because they carry the genetic memory of the Middle Passage. do not.
I was surprised when I looked into how there were a lot of similarities with British folk magic. So there were, as you say, influences in it. It's fascinating. It's all fascinating. And we could talk for days, I'm sure. So we better not.
It really is a great rabbit hole to go down. And if you're on the British side of it, to learn more about the British folk magic.
Yeah.
All right. That was tapped down hard. But the remnants are still there. The maypoles, the statue in the center of the village. There's so many wonderful remnants, but it's like magic in plain sight. You got to stop and look at where it's right there, and everything with that. And within, Southern Conjure, we're very much aware of the fact that the part of our magic comes from the middle passage. And then we need to walk gently and mindfully when we're using that magic. There are things that I don't put in the book because it's not my story to tell. I really thought very hard making sure that I was telling stories that are mine to tell and that I'm not off telling someone else's stuff.
Oh, it's all fascinating. And we could talk for days, but I'm going to finish up by asking one very last question about the last book that you read and enjoyed, not necessarily for research, maybe something that you just read for recreation.
I don't read for recreation.
That's all research.
But at the same time, I enjoy research.
Oh, I do.
My reading for research is recreation.
I love research.
And so I don't even remember the last, no, but I'm like, no, I will. The last book I read was Witchcraft Unchained by Craig Spencer, and which is a study talking about the British Isles and how they influence contemporary witchcraft and paganism as we know it. And a shout out to Craig's book. It was brilliant. I loved it. Somebody finally put the timeline, but also for us, the American side, it was seeing where some of our influences were coming from within contemporary witchcraft, and how so much of it was influenced by British. Sorry.
All of those will be fine. And then we break it down even further because I'm English.
Yes,
it all gets complicated.
And it does, and it should be. And it should be nice and messy, and none of us should make any sense.
Absolutely. Taran, it's been an absolute pleasure. And both your books, Conjuring the Dirt and HooDoo in the Psalms, both absolutely fascinating books. Thank
you so much.
They will add to anyone's practice, no matter what spiritual pathway you are. So both brilliant. So thank you, Taran, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to our viewers and our listeners, and we will see you again next time on Triple P.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.